One brotherhood ended in flames. The other inherited an empire. This is how the Knights Templar lost everything, and their rivals, the Hospitallers, took it all. In the chaos of the Crusades, two orders rose above all. The Templars, warrior monks in white, sworn to protect pilgrims with the sword. The Hospitallers, healers in black, tending the wounded on the same blood-soaked roads. Both were sworn to vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Both answered only to the Pope. And in the crucible of constant warfare, both would become two of the most formidable military and economic powers in the world. They were brothers in arms, yet they were also fierce competitors, vying for papal favor, royal donations, and battlefield glory. Their rivalry would define the era. Their differences would decide their fates. The strategic choices each made in the face of crisis sent one to annihilation and the other to inherit an empire. A hospital, however, is a vulnerable institution in a war zone. The early Hospitallers faced an urgent problem. How could they protect the pilgrims they were sworn to heal when the roads were overrun by bandits? Healing a wound was their purpose, but preventing that wound required a different set of skills. It raised a fundamental question: how does an order of monks become an army? Therefore, under their second leader, Raymond Dupuy, the Order of the Hospital of St. John underwent a radical transformation. It became militarized. The same monks who tended to the sick now took up the sword. They began providing armed escorts for pilgrims, a decision that quickly expanded into a substantial fighting force. This shift was also a matter of survival in the competitive world of patronage. The recently formed Knights Templar, created in 1119 with a purely military purpose, were attracting enormous support. To compete for donations, the Hospitallers had to prove they were just as vital to the defense of the Latin East. They distinguished themselves in battle, becoming masters of fortification and siege warfare. The order was granted control of some of the most strategic castles in the Holy Land, including the legendary Crac des Chevaliers, a virtually impregnable fortress that became their primary headquarters. At the height of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Hospitallers held 7 great forts and over 100 smaller estates. The Templars, meanwhile, were building their own network of fortifications, and the two orders often found themselves fighting side by side. Yet their rivalry simmered beneath the surface. They disagreed on strategy, on diplomacy, and on the very nature of their sacred duty. One wanted glory. The other wanted survival. The Templars charged into Saladin's army, calling retreat a sin. The Hospitallers begged for caution. The result? A slaughter, and the beginning of the end. This single event highlighted a fundamental difference in their philosophies. The Templars were often driven by a rigid, sacred ideology, while the Hospitallers consistently displayed a more pragmatic, adaptable approach to war and politics. But perpetual warfare created a new, pressing problem for both orders: how to pay for it. Castles, weapons, and professional soldiers required a constant flow of capital on an unprecedented scale. The Templars' solution to this problem was revolutionary. They created the world's first multinational banking system. A pilgrim in London could deposit his money at the Temple Church, receive a letter of credit, and withdraw the funds in Jerusalem. This system was secure, efficient, and made the Templars fantastically wealthy. They became the bankers to kings and popes, managing vast estates across Europe, and a fleet of ships to transport treasure and supplies. Their innovation made them indispensable to the financial life of Christendom. It also, however, inextricably linked their identity to secular finance. The Hospitallers also accumulated vast wealth, but their solution to the funding problem was different. They doubled down on their original purpose. While the Templars built a financial empire, the Hospitallers built the greatest hospital in the medieval world. Their infirmary in Jerusalem was a marvel of its age, large enough for 2,000 patients. It was organized into specialized wards, staffed by physicians and surgeons, and maintained with a revolutionary focus on cleanliness and ventilation. They treated anyone, regardless of faith, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, and believed that providing the best possible care was a sacred duty. While their knights fought on the frontiers, the heart of their order remained this massive, functioning institution of healing. This charitable mission provided them with a powerful, unimpeachable source of legitimacy. They were not just soldiers or bankers. They were the poor of Christ, serving the sick. This fundamental difference in their core identity would prove decisive. For nearly 2 centuries, the rival orders formed the backbone of the Crusader states. The Crusader states were always a fragile enterprise. By the late 13th century, their position had become untenable. The Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt had consolidated its power and began a systematic campaign to reclaim the coast. The fall of Jerusalem in 1187 was a devastating blow. The final bastion, the city of Acre, became the headquarters for both orders. When Acre was captured by the Mamluks in 1291, It was the end of the Christian presence in the Holy Land. This cataclysm presented both orders with the same existential problem. Their primary reason for existing had vanished. They were armies with no war, guardians of a kingdom that was gone. Expelled from the Holy Land, they retreated to Cyprus with their wealth and power intact, but their identity shattered. When your entire world is defined by a single mission, what do you become after that mission fails? The Hospitallers adapted. Their Grand Master, Guillaume de Villaret, understood that to survive, the order needed a new mission and a new sovereign territory. They could not remain guests in another kingdom, entangled in local politics. They needed their own state. The target he selected was the island of Rhodes, a Byzantine territory strategically located in the Aegean Sea. In 1309, after a brutal 2-year campaign, the Hospitallers conquered Rhodes and the surrounding islands. They had transformed themselves once more, from healers to soldiers, and now to a sovereign naval power. From Rhodes, they waged a relentless war on the Barbary pirates who terrorized Mediterranean shipping. They became the scourge of the Ottoman corsairs, the maritime defenders of Christendom. They had found a new enemy, a new purpose, and a new home. They had proven their continued relevance. The Templars, however, did not adapt. After leaving the Holy Land, they made no effort to secure a new sovereign territory or find a new military purpose. Instead, they fell back on what had become their defining strength: finance. They retired to their powerful commanderies in France, England, and across Europe, and continued to act as international bankers. Their wealth was legendary, their secrecy absolute. But without the clear mission of defending the Holy Land, their immense power and influence began to look less like a holy duty and more like a threat. They were a supranational entity, a state within a state, whose military purpose was now obsolete. Their wealth, once their greatest asset, now became their greatest vulnerability. Their biggest client was their biggest enemy. King Philip owed the Templars a fortune, so instead of paying his debt, he destroyed them. On Friday the 13th, 1307, the king's men stormed every Templar stronghold in France. The Knights of God became prisoners overnight. The charges were shocking: heresy, idolatry, and blasphemy. Under brutal torture, confessions were extracted. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, confessed and then recanted, only to be burned at the stake. The Templars had no clear purpose to rally support. They had no kingdom to defend them. Their secrecy, once a mark of their mystique, now worked against them, fueling rumors and suspicion. Philip pressured the Pope Clement V, who, in 1312, officially dissolved the Order of the Knights Templar. In a few short years, the most powerful military and financial institution in Europe had been utterly destroyed. The climax of this centuries-long rivalry came not on a battlefield, but in a papal decree. As the Templar Order was dismantled, the Pope faced a new problem: what to do with their immense, continent-spanning network of lands, castles, and farms. The Templars burned. The Hospitallers inherited their castles. 1,000 years later, one name survives, not as warriors, but as healers. The Knights of Malta still serve the sick and the poor. The greatest empire they ever built wasn't of stone, it was of mercy. It was the ultimate, decisive victory in their long competition. A takeover executed not by the sword, but by a strategy of survival and relevance. The fates of the two orders demonstrate the consequences of adaptation. The Templars were defined by their military function and financial network. They vanished when their war ended, and their wealth became a target. Their legacy is one of mystery, conspiracy, and a tragic, dramatic end. The Hospitallers survived because their identity was always anchored to a deeper, more resilient purpose. Their military function was a means to an end, not the end itself. Their core mission, the care of the sick, was timeless. When crusading fell out of fashion, they became a naval power. When they were finally driven from Rhodes by the Ottomans, they moved to Malta, withstanding the Great Siege of 1565 and continuing their work. Today, the Knights Templar exist only in legend. But the Knights Hospitaller endure. Known now as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, they are a sovereign entity under international law, maintaining diplomatic relations with over 100 countries. They no longer wage war. Instead, they have come full circle, returning to their original mission. They operate hospitals, run ambulance services, and provide humanitarian aid in crisis zones around the globe. The knights who once inherited an empire are still what they were at the very beginning, servants to the sick and the poor. Their survival is the ultimate testament to the power of a purpose that outlasts empires. If you want more videos like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.